Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm your host, Emma Thomas, founder of The Triple Shift and Managing the Menopause. My guest today is Julie Smith, and Julie is an executive coach and keynote speaker who works with leaders to grow their impact and supports teams to grow their effectiveness. She's also the author of award-winning book, Coach Yourself Confident, and we're going to get into some tips around confidence this morning. Welcome to the podcast, Julie.
Thanks very much. I'm happy to be here.
So I imagine confidence is a sort of a topic that comes up quite frequently in coaching conversations, certainly does in mine. But what inspired you to write the book, Coach Yourself Confident?
I think partly exactly what you've just alluded to, which is it comes up a lot. It's sort of present in the coaching room often. So sometimes it might be the sort of headline act in that somebody comes and says, I'd like to work on my confidence. I see that it's holding me back. But more frequently, it's sort of there hiding behind another development theme. So, coming to me to say, I need to be more strategic, or I need to influence better, or something like that, that actually when we start sort of doing the work and digging beneath the surface, what the sort of real issue to address is something about the way that they see themselves. So perhaps they just don't see themselves as a strategic person. Strategic people are those cleverer people over there, and that's not me. So I think I really notice that often a sort of thread of the coaching, as I say, even if it's not the headline, is about self-concept and confidence. So I guess having noticed that, and as lots of people, I've got my own sort of personal story of kind of growing confidence over time. I thought, what if I could package the benefits of exec coaching, which is pretty exclusive because it's expensive, within the pages, within the covers of a book. What might that look like, and how could I just make it more accessible? So that's what I did, and that was the idea behind Coach Yourself Confident.
I'll pick up on something that you just mentioned, actually, about this self-concept of be more strategic. I think that's a sort of kind of feedback that a lot of people might get in a development conversation and think, what does that actually mean? So I'm really interested to kind of hear what your take is on it.
I think it's so interesting, because I think it's one of those words that gets used without a particular sort of sense of a definitive sense of what it means. It's just strategy, be more strategic. And actually, even that phrasing is problematic. So be more strategic makes it feel like it's something that's part of your identity. And I think it leads into I'm not a strategic person, or I am a strategic person. Whereas really the request is something different. I think it might be do more strategic thinking, or share a perspective that's a little further out in terms of timescale, or look beyond the internal bounds of the organisation and look external and bring some of that perspective back in. I think that sometimes it's a bit lazy, and often the feedback we get is, or it's a sort of label for something that isn't very clearly articulated. And sometimes the work with coaching, I don't know whether you find this, but sometimes the work with coaching is sort of almost trying to understand, so what does that really mean? And
what are they saying when they say
what are they saying? And what do you think, and what do you want? What is the work to be done?
It's a whole other podcast episode, but we'll come back on track. So you talk in your book, Coach Yourself Confident, about this concept of humble confidence, and that's not something that I've come across before. So can you explain a bit more about that, and how do we kind of cultivate that balance that you talk about?
Yeah, definitely. So I sort of came up with the phrase quite early on as I was doing the book proposal, actually, and what it means is a sort of lining up between my capability, so the reality of what I'm able to do, my skills, my abilities, and my sense of myself, my confidence. So, humble confidence is those two things are in alignment. And it's not the sort of the kind of blustering confidence that says, I'm brilliant, or I look in the mirror and say I'm a tiger and, kind of pump myself up for the day. It's more about a grounded kind of objective view of myself. And I can own my strengths. And also I can be okay with the fact that, of course, I've got things that I'm not so great at. Of course, I've got things that I could still learn because I'm a human being. That's just goes along with the territory. So I think you could sort of humble confidence is grounded confidence. It's sort of realistic confidence. Does that sort of resonate? Does that make sense in terms of
I think sort of. I guess I think about it in terms of you're not sort of over or undercooking, like what almost. I'm kind of thinking of it almost as like the needle on the petrol tank or something. It's like you don't want to kind of underestimate where you can get to, and you don't want to overestimate it either. But it's like I think you talk about right sizing as well. This sort of sense of a sort of a properly objective, realistic view, so that you're not sort of shortchanging yourself, I guess.
That's a lovely word. I think definitely that you're not shortchanging yourself. And I think also that the alignment is important both ways. So the book is sort of aimed at people whose confidence lags behind their capability. And that's the sort of gap. It's a confidence deficit, if you like. But there are issues if an individual has an excess of confidence. Those people are probably unlikely to be
not going to pick up this book.
They don't need it, but there are definite downsides to that. And I do think there's a sort of piece in the book where I take a bit of a brief diversion into the sort of question of overconfidence, because I think sometimes there's a fear of getting too big for my boots. It's a very kind of English phrase, isn't it? But there's a sort of fear of becoming overconfident. And I think actually there's a sort of, an important message to people. If you do think your confidence lags behind your capability, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get all the way across to overconfident. So use your needle analogy, it's just really unlikely that you're going to move across the dial in such a dramatic way that you become sort of imbalanced, misaligned in the other direction.
Sure. What are some of the, if you like, sort of common misconceptions that people have about confidence, in your view?
I think there's probably a couple that come to mind, although they're related. So the first is that I think it's easy for us to associate confidence and success, and particularly assume that successful people must have confidence, that's a sort of ingredient that led to their success. And the reality is, in my view, that you can be wildly successful and lacking in confidence. And I do think there is some sort of downsides that come with that. So I talk about this thing called the self-doubt tax. And one of the ways that it's paid is in kind of overwork. And I think often what we see in people who are wildly successful is that there's a sort of a compensation going on, that they don't feel as confident as we think they are, as we think they should be from the outside when we look at everything that they've done. But what they are doing is compensating for self-doubt.
Working twice as hard as somebody else in a similar situation.
Exactly. Or setting themselves kind of even higher standards as a way to prove them to themselves as much as to others how brilliant they are. So the success and lack of confidence can actually go hand in hand. The issue clearly with that is that it's potentially really unsustainable. So if you are always over delivering, if you're always over preparing, if you're always overworking, it could be a recipe for burnout. So that's something about the sort of connection between success and confidence. I think the other misconception is, and it's probably just our use of language actually, that we sort of slip into, oh, they're really confident, or I'm not confident, and that sort of suggests that you are either a confident person or you're not. There's this sort of binary thing, where I think it's more true to say that for all of us, confidence sort of comes and goes. Like, there will be moments, or there will be situations where we feel that sense of self-assurance, we kind of trust ourselves, we feel secure. And then other moments when self-doubt sort of just explodes, sort of comes up for us, sometimes seemingly kind of without warning. And it can vary just to a lot of things, the context, who we're with, how much sleep we've had, all sorts of things, whether this thing that we're doing is new, whether it feels like it's high stakes, etc., etc. So I think the reality is, for all of us, confidence comes and goes. And it's maybe more about, how often do I feel that level of assurance and self-trust versus self-doubt, rather than I'm a confident person or I'm a not confident person.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that was something that came up actually in my podcast with Lauren Curry about that sort of situational aspect. And I think that's hopefully that's reassuring for people, that idea that, it kind of ebbs and flows, and it's not like a tap that you kind of turn on and off. It's that sort of, developing that muscle.
Yes. I think there was a couple of things come to mind for me. There's some of that is bad news, that it's not a tap that you turn on and off, i.e. there's not just an answer.
No magic wand. Sorry if you're listening and you were hoping.
Exactly that. Yeah, it's a kind of, it's just a continuous life's work. But the other thing that I did a webinar earlier in the year, and a ridiculous number of people signed up. So it was hosted by Get Abstract, and 10,000 people more than signed up. Wow. And actually, I kind of said that on the webinar to people, that in itself, I think, is just enormously reassuring. Because it just demonstrates what a human thing it is, that at least sometimes we might wish that we had a bit more confidence. And my goodness, we're not alone if that's what we notice.
Yeah, definitely. And you work with very senior people in organizations, and as you say, if it's coming up for them, then we shouldn't feel bad if it's coming up for us, right?
Absolutely.
It's perfectly natural. Well, obviously, you've been coaching for a long time. What have you sort of, over the years, what have you observed about sort of differences in sort of gender and confidence?
Yeah, it's such an interesting one. So I think the first thing I'd say, well, two things I'd say first. One is I still feel really unqualified to comment on it, because it's a kind of an area that a territory I'd like to dig into and research further. So that's one thing, and I might come back to that. The second is that I remember really clearly a sort of 24-hour period when I was as part of putting together the book proposal, and the kind of question that I was holding alongside my publisher was, should I write the book for women? And I remember going for a dog walk and just thinking, that sits really uncomfortably with me. Why is that? And where I got to was, actually, I could really picture a lot of men that I'd worked with who lacked confidence. And so I felt like there's a sort of slightly lazy connection between women and confidence, or women and lack of confidence, that just doesn't tell the full story. So I chose to write the book for all genders. Now, but that's not to say that the experience is the same across gender. So there is quite a lot of kind of research and evidence to suggest that women feel a lack of confidence more than men. I was reminding myself this morning, actually, of Marianne Sieghardt's brilliant book, The Authority Gap. I mean, it's as brilliant as it is horrifying. And one of the things that she said was that women are twice as likely to report suffering from imposter syndrome than men. Although I do think that something interesting that is the self-reporting. So, are we more likely to report that we suffer with imposter syndrome?
The men aren't owning up.
Exactly that. They don't even sort of see it in themselves, because it's never written about or talked about as a male thing. Or are they seeing it themselves and kind of feeling that they should hide it somehow because it's a thing that affects.
It's shameful, but it's so normalized. We talk about it so much for women. It's like, oh yeah,
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
course I've got imposter feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you go back to the, just a little bit earlier in our conversation, and we were talking about how human it is. A lack of confidence is really inherently human. And, you're human, whatever your gender. So, again, there's that sort of ups and downs of confidence. I think that shows up regardless of gender. And I can see that there are sort of deep-rooted societal norms that serve to undermine confidence in women. So I guess it's another explanation. Yes, maybe there's something about self-reporting in that stat around imposter syndrome, but there's also probably at least some reality that we are trained to an extent to feel less confident. So the horrifying things in the book, the authority gap, one of the things that is just shocking is British parents see their sons as cleverer than their daughters. And they're, not surprisingly, small girls kind of internalize this, that they are not as clever. And there was this study where 5-year-olds are read a story about a really clever person, a super smart person, and then they're shown an image and said, who is the person in the book? They're shown 2 images to choose from. One is a female image and one is a male image. And at 5, when children are read that story, they are most likely to choose their own gender. So they're but by 7, girls are more likely to choose, or more readily choose, the male image. So even by 7, there's some evidence to suggest that there's an internalizing of we are not as clever. And there's a whole load of other things as well that sort of then, I guess, it sort of builds up a picture about, it's not surprising that what we carry into adulthood is some unhelpful kind of beliefs about ourselves held at a really unconscious level that serve to diminish our confidence. This is probably also a whole other podcast.
Yes. We'll come back to that one. You talk about this concept of confidence saboteurs. So if people haven't sort of come across that term before, what are some of the kind of key ones to sort of be on the lookout for, and sort of some strategies for tackling those?
Yeah. The confidence saboteurs, the idea of it is that most of them, all but one, I think I talk about in the book, kind of exist in our own heads. They're the things that we do to ourselves. So one of them, maybe to pick up on, is comparisonitis, which I'm sure you'll
put my hand up. Oh, you can't see me because we're well,
if you both of us, we've both got our hands up here. And comparisonitis, I named it that because it's a bit like tonsillitis, that it's it's part of life, but it's not really desirable. Don't go out of our way to try and get it. And it's just that habit of comparing ourselves to other people in a way that is diminishing. So it's a sort of we are comparing ourselves in a way that we are always the less than, and we probably are most alert to what are the ways that all of those people are better than me, less alert to the ways that we might be more developed in a particular skill or better at a certain thing.
It's that sort of negativity bias that our brains love, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's diminishing because we're kind of focusing on the gap, and we're focusing on the ways that we are less than. So how do we tackle that? I think one of the things, one of the kind of key things in the book actually is the power of awareness. So just the sort of noticing that you're doing it. And I quite like the idea of, much as, I say, maybe I don't think it's only me, who you might feel a bit under the weather and you sort of say, I've not got time for this today. I've really not got time for any kind of illness. I think there's a bit of, I've not got time for comparisonitis today. I just need to kind of crack on with everything that I've got to do. So I think the sort of noticing it and just choosing to step aside from it.
Mm.
There's another really kind of brilliant way to look at it that I have stolen, but I'll give full credit to a colleague of mine, Emma Smith, and she talks about full stop. So she's, you might say she is brilliantly creative, full stop. And it's the full stop that's important, because what you're then editing out is she is brilliantly creative, and I wish I was. Oh gosh, she's so much better than that.
Why aren't I like that?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's something brilliant about the power of the full stop.
Love
And then
that.
it's probably something just fundamental about reminding yourself that it's always a sort of oranges and apples comparison. It's never fair, because we're all different. We're all
gloriously unique and made,
exactly.
forged in our own particular set of circumstances with our own experiences and wonderful kind of combinations of skills and
Exactly
outlook.
that. Yeah. Do you want
Own
another
it.
saboteur, Emma?
Sure. Why not? Don't want to give too many away, because we want people to read your book. But
I do find it's interesting, isn't it? I was reflecting this morning how much to give away in kind of talks and stuff, and I take the view that just as much as I can
more is more.
Indeed. Yeah, definitely. So maybe we'll pick perfectionism. Anybody who you can't see this, but I have my hand up again. And perfectionism is it's really sapping of confidence. It's a saboteur, because we set this bar so ridiculously high that it's impossible to meet, and then we focus on the gap between what we deliver, however brilliant it is, and this absurdly high bar of perfection. And I think how to tackle that, there is a kind of entire bookcase worth of books probably should be written about that, but some of the things I'd say are, one is to sort of remind yourself of and slightly laugh at the ridiculousness of it, that it is a kind of a bar that's permanently out of reach. And then a couple of sort of practical things. One is, if your perfectionism shows up in the form of procrastination, which it does for me, because I'll do that thing later. Emma's got her hand up. I'll do that thing later because it needs to be really, really good, and I'll get maybe I'll get to that tomorrow. I have found incredibly important embracing the idea of the shitty first draft, and it comes from, I had this little post-it throughout writing, and I'm writing a second book now, and I've got the post-it back, which is from Anne Lamott, and she says, all good writers write shitty first drafts. That's how they write good second drafts and terrific third drafts. And I have very much taken it to heart. I mean, it was incredibly useful. I think without it, I probably would still be writing the first version of the book. And so incredibly useful for writing the book, but I've sort of taken it on as a bit of a mantra for life, which is the kind of just get started, start and improve.
Try, learn, fail, give yourself permission to not be perfect, and just kind of crack on.
All of that good stuff. So yeah, I could probably talk more about perfectionism, partly because it's I know it from the inside, but maybe that's enough for now.
Yeah, I would. So you've talked about this sort of, the internal sabotage that we do to ourselves. What about sort of external things, setbacks that might sort of temporarily kind of give our confidence a knock? How can we sort of handle those things? Because quite often there's things that are totally out of our control. Things like redundancy, for example, which I've lived through twice, which is no fun. I'm sure there'll be people listening too that have had experience of that. So when life is lifing and or we're having a terrible week at work or whatever, and that is knocking our confidence, what can we do?
I love that, when life is lifing. Yeah, when there's a lot of life going on. Well, I mean, I think you've touched on, in that phrase, you've touched on something really important, which is sort of just how can we remind ourselves that this thing that's happened that we didn't want to happen. So whether it's a kind of small setback at work, a project didn't get signed off, or whatever it might be, or whether it's something much bigger like being made redundant, it is normal. It's almost these setbacks and kind of failures are boringly normal, and again are part of the human experience. And if we can remind ourselves of that, it might help us to avoid falling into the trap of sort of searching for what's the deficit, the inadequacy, the thing about me that led this to happen. Because the really sort of shitty thing about a setback or a failure is when it's difficult, and then we layer on top of that difficulty a sort of beating up of ourselves, and it's the beating up of ourselves that then knocks our confidence. So there's something about, okay, it might feel enormously personal, but failure and difficulty and redundancy and whatever else happens to other people too. I think some of the other things are trying to see the grey in any setback. So our brains can quite quickly go to, this is an absolute disaster. And there may be there may be ways that it is really, really difficult and really, really unfortunate. I'm not meaning to diminish something like being made redundant. But perhaps it's not the sort of full story. Perhaps there is some grey to see about, even it gives me the opportunity to think about what I want to do next, or, it may be easier to see the grey in some of the day-to-day stuff. That project didn't get signed off, but I had an hour with the exec team and they've seen a bit more about what I'm about, or, something of that nature. What's the sort of good in the bad? A bit like, I did that talk and I forgot what I was going to say. I did this presentation, I forgot what I was going to say halfway through. What an absolute disaster. Yes, but did you sort of, burst into tears and rush out of the room? No. Did you find something to say and continue? Yes. Okay, well, that's a success.
You survived. You got through it.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And then the other thing that I think is really helpful is sort of doing a bit of mental time travel. So we're quite good at that, and we can use it to our advantage if we sort of mentally step forward a week, a month, a year, and kind of look back from that perspective at this particular setback, this experience. I think we can see if we can help ourselves to see it as a difficult episode, a difficult page, a difficult chapter, rather than the sort of whole story. And it's
sort of helicoptering up and kind of being able to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, so see the whole. So it's, yes, was that a difficult experience? Absolutely. Does it define us? No, or it doesn't need to.
Yeah. So for somebody that might be sort of feeling underconfident or kind of looking to kind of flex that confidence muscle, what are some sort of effective exercises we might be able to use to, maybe not necessarily on a daily basis, but kind of keep basically helping us to kind of work out that confidence muscle to build it up?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, by the way, building up the confidence muscle,
because you can use that in the next book. That's fine.
I will. I've written it down. Confidence gym. I'm thinking of a title now.
Yeah.
So some of the exercises. So one thing I think that has landed quite well with people is the idea of naming and even drawing your inner critic. So your inner critic being that kind of unhelpful voice that
sits on your left shoulder or whichever.
Yeah. And interesting, not everybody has one, but a lot of us have an inner critic. And if you're somebody who lacks confidence, then it's possible that inner critic's quite loud. And they are trying to keep us safe, but they are not very helpful in the way that they do it. So they're sort of, don't say that, you're going to sound like an idiot, or, oh my goodness, why on earth did you put yourself forward for that? Or whatever it might be. So the idea of unmasking that inner critic and just putting a little bit of distance between them and you, I think is helpful. And one way you can do that is to give them a name. So mine's called Nigel.
Sorry to any Nigels listening. There probably are no Nigels listening because not target market. But
and I don't know why I came up with Nigel, and I always feel bad because I do know some Nigels, and I feel like it's somehow disparaging of them, but it's not anyway. But the reason why give it a name is because it does give that little bit of distance that you might then be able to think, oh, that's Nigel off again.
There he goes.
And there he goes. Yeah.
Shut up, Nigel.
And and partly, thanks, Nigel, but I've got this. You can stay quiet. And also it's sort of without any distance, it's easy to believe the thought. Whereas with a bit of, that's Nigel saying that I should stop doing podcasts because I just ramble, then it's easier to think, okay, that's just that's just
it's that self-awareness piece again, isn't it? It's like you're kind of, if you like you say, you're separating out that bit of the internal monologue that is like, okay, that's not the helpful kind of, and a lot of the time it's not true. So that kind of, because of holding it at arm's length almost, and being able to inspect it and think, is that right? Is that true? Is it really true? Is it kind? Am I being kind of compassionate and kind to myself, or am I really sticking the boot in?
Absolutely. And I think let's pick up on that last point you made. There's another, I think, just really simple activity that can be helpful, which is about being kind to yourself. So that, really knowing that we can be so harsh on ourselves in a way that we wouldn't be with other people, the sort of trying to use that. So if you notice a bit of an inner critic attack, kind of, stop, take a breath, pause, breathe, and then ask yourself, if I was to find somebody else, a friend in this situation, what would I say to them? Because you probably wouldn't tell them that they're an absolute idiot and they shouldn't be doing this anyway, and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure that you would find something constructive and balanced and kind to say to them.
Yeah. What would your bestie say to you? So almost like you've got Nigel on one shoulder and you've got your best friend on the other, but like turn around actually and go, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's something about that best friend is somebody who has your best interest at heart, is willing to be honest with you. So they're not just telling you, no, you're brilliant. It's not helpful to just have the sort of opposite.
The ego massage.
Exactly. Yeah. But somebody who can just help you to see it in a little bit more of it, see a situation in a more objective and balanced way. So yes. And then I think the other thing that I would say in sort of day to day is just want to look out for, I think, that our language, it's sort of minding your language, that the language that we use, it can undermine confidence, both our own and the extent that other people would have confidence in us. So I think there's something about noticing when we might be using an excess of caveats. So, sort of, it's probably a really silly idea, but, or, forget that, I haven't really thought it through, or, or even things like, is that clear? Is that all right? Have you got that? Which is not saying, do you have any questions on what I've just said? It's more asking for, please reassure me that I haven't just bumbled on like a fool and, completely lost everybody. So noticing some of the language that might signal self-doubt to other people, but also to yourself, this idea of we kind of language creates reality. So watching out for caveats. I think it's brilliant. An activity you can do with your emails is clearly, it's harder verbally because it might be out before you've noticed it. But before you click send on an email, have a quick scan.
There's a great resource actually, which I'll put in the show notes, which is on Tara Moore's website, and I posted about this on LinkedIn the other day. So just sort of all those kind of qualifiers and sort of minimizing language. So she's got a really good cheat sheet actually on her website, which you can download. So I'll include that, and you can kind of, if people want to, print it, stick it up somewhere near your on your desk or wall behind your desk or whatever, and just have a little scan through and just thinking about where am I tending, kind of drifting into those habits, because I think it's easily done.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. I'm going to have a look at that. I'm sure it's got on there sort of, unnecessary apologies.
Yeah.
I find I have to edit those out quite a lot. The kind of,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to chase. No,
I'm so
not.
sorry to
Yeah.
do this perfectly rational
Yes.
thing. Fabulous. Julie, thank you so much. Hopefully we've not given so much away that people aren't going to go and grab a copy of your book. And if you're listening to this close to the time of release, good news, you can buy the Kindle edition for just 99p until the middle of August.
Yes.
2025. I know lots of people do kind of listen to these months and months later, but if you're listening to this close to the release date, there'll be a link in the show notes so you can go and grab your own copy for that absolute bargain. But where else can people find you, Julia?
Yes, absolutely. And that bargain is because it's up for an award. It's a finalist for a business book award.
Yay! So that's a confidence boost. Congratulations. And when are the awards?
The awards are 10th of September. It's a black tie do in London. How exciting is that?
That's very exciting. Good. Everything crossed for Julie.
Indeed. So where can people find me? LinkedIn. I kind of hang out on LinkedIn. I have quite a common surname, so you might be best to.
We'll put a little link so people can find you. And your website is talentsprout.co.uk.
It is. Yeah. So those are probably the best places to connect with me, and I'd love to connect with people.
Fantastic. Thank you. I hope if you've been listening, you've picked up some great hints and tips. I genuinely love to hear from people if when they've kind of things have resonated with them or they've found it helpful. So you can find me on LinkedIn as well, or all the various other places that are in the links in the show notes, and tell me. I want to know. Julie, thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely reconnecting with you again. And yes, thanks so much, and good luck for your awards. I will be watching.
Thanks very much, Emma. It's been a joy.
Thanks for listening to the Middling Along podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go and leave us a review over at Apple Podcasts. You can check out the full back catalogue of all our episodes over at middlingalong.com. You can also find out more about my work as a coach. Go to www.thetripleshift.org.